Okay, everyone get comfortable. How you doing? My name is Keith Schmitz. I'm with Grassroots North Shore, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and despite that, you all have decided to come out and hear the 7 great candidates that we have running for governor out here in front of you. Let's face it, you're here because you care, right? That's been our latest phrase, right? And because you care, you're here because you want to be aware about what's going on with this election. We've had, I must say, when it comes to candidates, an embarrassment of riches versus the other party, which just has embarrassments. So, we know what has to be done. Those of you who have, just out of curiosity, who in this room has lived in Wisconsin all their lives? Yeah, that's great. That's a great number. You know, there's certain things that we come to expect from our state. Fair play, the spirit that everyone matters, the idea that progress matters, and that's one thing that we've had throughout our history. All the way from the dairy cream separator that was started back in the 1880s up to stem cell research. And all of these things have been under threat over the last 8 years, which we could probably affectionately call Wisconsin's dark ages. So it's really gratifying to see that we have people who've decided to step up and run for governor. Let's give them all a big hand. I cannot stress enough, you're all here. The important thing, of course, is knowing what the candidates are all about. More important is over the next 5 months, you need to find time to get involved with the election. You have to get involved with this election. So, starting off with Malin Mitchell, what steps would you take to reverse mass incarceration?
Thank you all for coming today. My name is Malin Mitchell. I'm one of 20,000 candidates for governor, it seems, but mass incarceration is one of our critical points that we talk about in my campaign. And we put more African-American males behind bars in this state than any other state in the country. And that's not a Republican issue. That's not a Democrat issue. That's an issue that we need to tackle here in the state. It never escapes me that I'm raising 2 black kids in the state of Wisconsin, where it actually is the worst place in the country to raise black children. So this is very near and dear to my heart. We have the ability in this state to put about 16,000 folks in jail. And right now we have over 24,000 people in jail right now. So there's a lot of things we can do. One thing is that we need to do, and working with the Republicans even, we need to decrim marijuana. Now I've come out for a full legalization of marijuana, but if we can't get that done, we need to first decrim it. Truth in sentencing has had the ill reverse effects where actually it's overcrowding our jails, so we need to get rid of truth in sentencing. We need to ban the box on applications, because we all know if you check that F at the front of an application, that application more likely goes in the garbage. Our earned release program, we're a challenge incarceration program for those under 18. We have over 5,900 people that are waiting to actually get the help they need, substance abuse help or mental health they need to actually be reacclimated with society. Being addicted is not a crime. So we need to make sure we take care of a lot of our vulnerable people here in the state. I will tell you as well that we have to look at community policing. We have to look at how we police individuals in our state. We need to look at actually having the ability to have training, statewide training for those folks that I work with police every day. We need to make sure we have statewide training, and we have to look at implicit bias. But at the end of the day, it's about us having a state that doesn't spend $1 billion a year like we do on the Department of Corrections. We spend more money in the Department of Corrections than we do actually taking care of our youth by way of the UW system. So there's a lot of things we need to do, but first thing we need to do is decrim marijuana and make sure that we are not putting people behind bars, but make sure we're unlocking their imaginations and make sure we're working to actually make everyone rise in this state together.
Well, I'm very delighted to be here with you today. My name is Kelda Royce, and I'm running for governor to restore opportunity and fairness to our state. We cannot do that if we continue to incarcerate twice as many people as our neighboring state, Minnesota. I don't think we're twice as criminal. We're Wisconsin nice. So we have to really address not only how many people are in prison, but who we put in prison. And as Malin mentioned, we actually have the highest percentage of African American males in prison, higher than any other state in the nation. So there is certainly a racial justice component. I think it starts long before people actually go in prison. I think we have to invest a lot more money on the front end in early childhood education, in our K-12 programs, and in pathways out of poverty, and especially in communities that have been divested in, communities like a lot of the places in Milwaukee and like where I started out this morning. And communities like this are doing fairly well, but we have to make sure that that prosperity transfers everywhere in the state. Now, when I was in law school, my law professor told me there are only two valid reasons for somebody to go to prison: public safety and just punishment. And our current system does neither. We have to start on the front with the charging decision and how long people get sentences, because unfortunately, if you're African American, you're likely to get a longer sentence. We have to make sure that we're not handing out 10, 20, 30-year sentences for crimes that really don't deserve it. We have to greatly expand treatment and diversion courts so that people who are struggling with mental health or substance use disorder, which is actually the majority of people in our prisons, are getting the treatment they need and working in a restorative justice model rather than a punitive one. Then when people are in prison, we have to restore the programming that's been cut. Not only, of course, treatment, but mental health care, counseling, educational opportunities, and job training so that when they get out, which virtually all people will, they have something that they can do. We've got a lot more work to do on this issue, and you can check on my website for details.
Paul Sockland.
Thank you very much. During the course of this discussion, I'm going to keep coming back to the fact that we need a vision for the state, a vision that recognizes that our first obligation is to have sustainable families. And to have sustainable families, there has to be housing, there has to be transportation, there has to be quality child care, there has to be health care, and health care includes nutrition, behavioral health, and substance abuse. And there has to be education which leads to career paths, not technical education, but education that instructs young people on how to think. That's the purpose of education in our community. I bring this up because while we've got solutions which will be addressed during the course of a tenure of the next governor, solutions such as changing discharge policies. There should be a discharge policy that includes housing, jobs for everyone who is released from a Wisconsin institution, whether or not it is a prison or it's a behavioral health facility. Second thing we have to do, as was already discussed, we have to address the question of how people got in the institution. Part of it will be resolved through changes in laws that involve sentencing certain types of offenses which do not deserve prison terms. But if we're really going to significantly make a difference in this state, we are, instead of spending hundreds of millions, no, billions of dollars to ship to a foreign Chinese corporation for an adventure in Foxconn, which is not going to work, we're going to invest that money in those 5 areas that I mentioned, and that will also include, I've got to add this to the discussion, internet access, which is critical for our kids' learning, which is critical in terms of Wisconsin businesses and the future of our state. Thank you.
Wisconsin does have a state budget right now that spends more money on prisons than it does on the entire university system. And if you look just across the border to the west, you see a state that imprisons half as many people as Wisconsin. And yet our two states, Minnesota and Wisconsin, have virtually identical crime rates. So imprisoning twice as many people hasn't brought down crime. It's only left us with a budget that literally spends more locking people up than we spend on unlocking human potential. And if you look at how Minnesota accomplishes a prison population that is half the size of Wisconsin's, it has everything to do with a philosophy of not locking up nonviolent offenders, but rather using alternative approaches to sentencing. If you haven't committed a violent act or damaged property, you don't belong behind bars. And then Minnesota also spends more on mental health treatment and drug treatment through its health care system, whereas Wisconsin currently is really dealing with mental health through corrections, through our prison system. And that is the wrong way to deal with mental health challenges. So yeah, we need to stop locking up nonviolent offenders. We need to change the pardon policy. Currently, the governor says no pardons, no how, no way, under any circumstances. If you haven't committed a violent act or damaged property, you don't belong behind bars. And we need to end crimeless parole revocation. If you've done your time and you're back out on parole, you should never go back behind bars without committing a new offense.
Thank you.
As a member of the Corrections Committee, I visited almost every facility in the state, every corrections facility, and when I went to Techeetah, the only women's facility, I met a woman, an African-American woman who was incarcerated for intent to deliver a controlled substance. She never actually delivered the controlled substance, and she wanted to buy shoes for her, sneakers for her grandson, and she was sentenced to 43 actual years. This shows you how totally messed up the sentencing system is and how much it needs to be changed. As governor, I will put together a commission to review all of the sentences. I will begin with the sentences that have to do with drugs and mental illness and crimes of poverty. I will take the Medicaid expansion money, which frees up $286 million to create a community-based mental health and treatment addiction recovery system so that we don't have people incarcerated, but they're treated in their community. We need to bring back the parole board. We need to fund probation because too many people are back in prison because of crimeless paper violations. And we need to pay attention not only to those incarcerated, but to his staff. I met with a woman named Pandora who was assaulted by a youth in the Lincoln Hills. And she was assaulted so much so that she was made unconscious. And the governor refused to meet with her. These are examples of what I see as red flags. Okay, 1 minute left. Red flags in the system. Red flags that the governor can actually make a difference in by changing the tone at the top, supporting those people who are released, giving them the services that they need so they don't go back into the community without their medication, without access to health care, without access to a place to live. We need to stop the policy that says that if you're in public housing, you can't be there if you've ever been convicted or evicted. What a ridiculous policy. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for being here on a great afternoon outside, but we have good people here talking about really important things. I have to just reiterate something that was just talked about, and that's around the issue of leadership. Here we have Scott Walker in office for how many years and how many years, and Lincoln Hills for that same period of time has been at war with young people that were there to be rehabilitated and the adults that were there to help them. Absolutely, he never stepped in, and we have a situation now where we're paying good money to correct that situation, but it should not have gone on that long. So the issue here is to be not soft on crime, but to be smart on crime. There's all sorts of places across this country, red states and blue states, that frankly have figured it out. There are places like Texas where they decided to reinvest the savings by closing down correctional institutions. For every $1 that they have put into rehabilitation, they've received $9 in savings. So it's not even a money issue. It's about where we are as a state. What are our priorities? My priorities are about rehabilitation. We have to focus on providing the services for people so that when they come out into the community again, they are ready to be productive in society. We have to stop the idea of having mandatory minimum sentences. We have to decriminalize the whole issues of using drugs. We have to have drug court. The bottom line, we have to stop institutionalizing people and incarcerating people and help people. Any place you go across the state, people agree with us. This isn't about making sure that people are safe. It's about making sure that people absolutely believe that they can reintegrate into society and make a difference. Thank you very much. It's a great topic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Keith. Here are my action items, and here how I'd pay for them. I also would legalize marijuana, not because I think it's a good thing to smoke it, but it's legal in Colorado, it's legal elsewhere. In this state, it can become a felony if you have 2 possession offenses. People have been put in jail for having less weight marijuana than a penny, for instance, and I just think that's wrong. It destroys lives. But I'll go further. I will pardon everybody in our jail and prison system who's there for a low-level, nonviolent possession offense. And from long years of practicing law at Quarles and Brady, many years, and I've handled a number of criminal cases, pro bono and otherwise, I would also require judges to put an economic impact statement in their sentencing document that says, I understand that by putting this person in for 40 years, it's going to cost X million dollars and free medical care, and all these cowboy judges in some areas of the state who think they're tough on crime are going to face angry taxpayers who don't like to see that amount of money. I would also severely restrict the use of solitary confinement. It's a torture, it's wrong, and it's abused, and I would close down the Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. But I want to say how we're going to pay for this, and I'm going to reiterate this a number of times tonight. The Foxconn deal is a dishonest deal. $4.5 billion is going to strangle our budget for the next 15 years, not only taking money out of the University of Wisconsin system and public education, but everything I want to do about alternative mental health treatments and so forth is going to have to go by the board. We must stop it. It's a dishonest thing. It's not only bad management, it's something that will kill this state. And I am perhaps the only person up here who has put out a plan from my own commercial litigation experience in complex litigation at Quarles and Brady, how I'll bring suit the day I am governor to stop that deal and get that money for these other purposes. Thank you.
And the question is, how about that? What steps would you take to reverse the trend in the last 8 years decreasing environmental regulation and relaxation of environmental protections? I think this is like shooting fish in a polluted barrel, but you all take this question. Thank you.
I did my growing up on a dairy farm. I come from a farming background. Our farm was about halfway between Eau Claire and Wausau. I always felt like it was our job to feed people, not poison people. And now when I watch how we have this massive scale industrialization of agriculture, increasingly I don't see agriculture being practiced in a way that doesn't poison the neighbors. And we've got to deal with that. So part of the answer is putting government on the side of incentivizing sustainable small-scale agriculture. A big part is restoring independence to the Department of Natural Resources and getting the DNR back to bringing back the scientists and putting science at the heart of that agency's work. That agency scrubbed any mention of climate change from its website. We've got to put the mentality back in the DNR that climate change is real and has to be addressed. I want Wisconsin's goal also to be the first state in America fully powered by renewable energy. So I want our government put on the side of the energy revolution. And as families and businesses are pushing on the accelerator to move toward that renewable energy future, I don't want our own state government hitting the brakes. I want government on the side of incentivizing a renewable energy economy. And then finally, I got to say that we have to restore the conservation ethic that used to run so deep in Wisconsin. And it was bred into me growing up on a farm, that you take care of the land and the air and the water. And now we're allowing polluters to write their own pollution permits in this state. And the DNR simply blesses the rules that the polluters come up with. No, we have got to bring science back to the heart of the agency and have those scientists determine what is environmentally sustainable for this state, and then protect the public and protect the land and the air and the water, the animals and the people in our state. That has got to be central to what our government does to protect the people of Wisconsin.
Our state is the 10th most moved out of state in the nation. And that's because people my age and younger are leaving. And what are the things that we've got going for us? One of the biggest things is our environment. It's a beautiful state. It's one of the things that I and my family love, and it's one of the things that I think is passed on from generation to generation. We have great traditions of conservation, outdoorsmanship, hunting, fishing, recreating, and we are putting that at risk by allowing polluters to write their own permits, by defunding the DNR. We have to restore evidence-based, science-based decision-making to our Department of Natural Resources and make it a leader again in conservation. Now, when I was in the state assembly, we dealt with an issue that had been put to bed. And the governor came in and wanted to allow mining again in this state. And we didn't have a mining moratorium. We just said, if you want to mine, if you want to extract resources, you got to show that you can do it safely without poisoning our water, without destroying the soil and the air. And mining companies haven't been able to do that. But a lot of Democrats were afraid of going up against the governor and saying, hey, this is wrong. We can't allow mining companies to just come in and, in this case, pollute a watershed that goes into Lake Superior. I was not afraid. I stood up immediately and said, this is wrong, and I'm going to oppose it. And in fact, I filed an open records request with the governor and tried to force him and had to threaten to sue him for him to actually produce the records of all the different contacts between his administration and his DNR and the mining executives. So we need a governor who's willing to stand up to special interests and put science back in the driver's seat. Not me, I'm a politician, but people like my stepdad, who's an environmental lawyer and knows about conservation and water quality and how to make Wisconsin great. Those are the people who should be making our environmental decisions. The second thing I'll tell you about is reaching out across the aisle and helping Wisconsin be one of the first states in the nation to ban bisphenol A, BPA. It's a toxic chemical and it was in children's products like baby bottles. And I helped Wisconsin become a leader, so much so that California looked to us and said, hey, we should do that too. And guess who didn't like it? Big polluters, the chemical companies. But it did not stop me. We got it done, and we're protecting our kids just like we're going to do when I'm governor.
Thank you. I represent in the state Senate more mines than any other Senate district. And I have been dealing with the effects of these mines in the last 8 years or so. I recently worked with a family who lost a horse named Apples. And after the autopsy was done on the horse, it looked like the horse had liver disease. And the family finally was able to do some heavy metal testing. And they found out that the water had 10 times the allowable level of arsenic. And we can't prove it yet, but a nearby sand mine had drilled through the aquifer and released these heavy metals. The monitoring of the water across the state is not being done the way that it needs to be done. And the Department of Natural Resources is not enforcing its own law. So that a recent audit by the Legislative Audit Bureau showed that over 90% of the time, by their own rules, the DNR was not doing the citation or enforcement that it needed to be doing. As governor, I would hire back the scientists that were fired. I would put back the Bureau of Science Services that the governor dissolved in the last budget. My PhD is in health research. I would post that research on the department's website so that everybody could see. I would put those guys to work, making sure that climate change, that the state was dealing with the effects of climate change. We've had 200-year floods back to back in western and northern Wisconsin. And I would show the people what has happened to the degradation of our environment so that we could push the legislature to elect officials and to support officials that would roll back the assault on the environment with the changes in the law. So whether it's changes in wetlands, changes in air monitoring, changes in water monitoring, hiring back the people that do the inspections. Why is it that we have so many CAFOs that are polluting the water? How come the sand mines are getting away with what they're doing? Because the inspectors aren't there. The inspectors, over 80% of the sand mines are not being inspected. So we need to do the inspections so that we can do the enforcement. Many of these laws are still on the books, but we need a leader that says, let's get to work, let's do the enforcement, let's send these guys over to the Department of Justice. Why is it there's been this huge drop in enforcement? Thank you.
This is a great topic. I got my bachelor's degree in zoology and chemistry, and so science is part of my DNA. And I can tell you, there's all sorts of things we need to worry about, but it's overall, We have to believe in science. There's a reason why certain conclusions are reached through the scientific method. We need to value science and make decisions based on science. My background will help me do that. I will also tell you that we have lots of protections already in the book. Clearly, the present governor and his staff have decided that we're not going to be balancing business interests with environmental interests. We are going to value business interests. Let's just take a look at water. Water, Texas has oil, we have water. I'll take water any day. But you think about western Wisconsin, where we have frack mining being significant issues and local control being taken away from folks. Central Wisconsin, where we have lots of high capacity wells taking water out of the aquifers and for business purposes, and lakes and rivers are draining in central Wisconsin. And of course, eastern Wisconsin, we have the problem with large farms and CAFO is polluting wells. And so all those things are important, and lead in our water also, I will suggest. Anyway, the bottom line is we have to value science. I would put the scientists back to work at the Department of Public Instruction. I'll say it quickly. We actually stole their DNR's climate change website and put it on ours before they took it away. So if you're looking for it, look at the dpi.org. We will change the way we do things in this state. An independent DNR secretary, an independent board that talks about all the values that we have in the state of Wisconsin. We can do this. It's not rocket science, but it is science. We will change this. Thank you very much.
Here are the action items that I would do on some of the issues that have been so ably discussed by my colleagues. First of all, I would have an independent DNR that elects its own chair, not subject to manipulation by any governor. Secondly, I would restore local control to all the counties and municipalities in the state to regulate CAFOs. If a county didn't want a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation, they wouldn't get it. The geology of Kewaunee County, Marinette County, and elsewhere doesn't tolerate it. Other counties might, but they should make the decision. The third thing I would do would be demand that permits take into account adjacent wells. Right now, they're forbidden from taking into account other strains on the aquifer, and as a result, we're draining the aquifer in the central part of the state. But I want to revert to one particular issue that I mentioned before on Foxconn, because it wraps up much of what I'm talking about. This company is exempt from our environmental impact statements. It's exempt from our wetlands laws. They filled in wetlands. It's permitted to take millions of gallons of water a day out of Lake Michigan and return it in treated form. But with no environmental impact statement, this company is under investigation in mainland China, communist China, for polluting a tributary of the Yangtze River. Now, if they're under investigation there, why are we permitting them in Racine, right on Lake Michigan, to get into Lake Michigan? I will stop that. It must be stopped. I will also join the air quality lawsuit of the Attorney General of Illinois to not relax the standards in southeastern Wisconsin. And I will join the Menominee Indian lawsuit right now against the Back 40 mine on the Menominee River in Michigan, which is going to put sulfides and pollute for a long, long time the Menominee River. I will also step into the dispute where Tyco and Johnson Controls in Marinette County have polluted the groundwater to the point they're starting to drink bottled water in parts of Marinette County as they are in Kewaunee County. At the end, I would simply say this. We are the state of Aldo Leopold, John Muir, and Gaylord Nelson. And we have an administration, a Republican administration, that does not care about water quality, doesn't care about land quality, doesn't care about stewardship of our public lands. And it's about time we restored a fighting Bob LaFollette in this state to clear up that corruption and clean our state back up again. Thank you.
You know, as your governor, the first thing I will do for the state of Wisconsin is to make Wisconsin believe in science again. And we do that by actually depoliticizing the DNR, bringing back the scientists back to the DNR, bringing back the engineers, and making sure the DNR actually is a stable force in our state. One of the greatest things we have going for our state is our natural resources. So we have to protect them. And we have to protect them not just for us, but for the future. I'm actually a deer hunter. And I know a lot of you are thinking like, wow, black guy at deer hunts. Yes. It's real. But we have to make sure we take care of our natural resources. And making sure we're number one in renewable energy in our state is not just one of moral ethics. It can actually be a huge economic driver for our state. If we're number one in renewable energy, if we make sure our state buildings, our local, county, municipal buildings are renewable energy, we will not only be doing the right thing for our government, we will be doing the right thing for the state when it comes to making our economy thrive and giving everyone the freedom to thrive. So we have to do everything in our power to make sure we protect our natural resources. When I came on the job, the fire department in 1997, I believe we had over 23,000 dairy farmers. Now, as of 2015, we have less than 10,000. That's a problem. So we need to do everything we can to help our dairy farmers, everything we can to help our natural resources thrive, and also make sure we help our state. And you know, our president pulled out a Paris Accord. We all know that he is, we're supposed to be nice, so I won't say he's an idiot, but we have to make sure in our state of Wisconsin that we are doing everything we can to make sure we take care of our natural resources, because that's one of the greatest things here. And I agree with Matt on this, that letting Foxconn pump 7 million gallons of water a day out of Lake Michigan without having much oversight or overview and not a lot of transparency with that deal, that's a problem. So we have to, as a governor, the next governor has to be an environmental governor, not just because of mere morals and ethics, but it's also one of our economy as well.
When I made the decision to attend the University of Wisconsin as an undergraduate, there were three factors that entered into that decision. The first was it was a great university. Secondly, the legacy of Bob LaFollette. And the third is because of one of my childhood heroes, Senator Gaylord Nelson. And that was probably one of the finest, most proud moments in my life is when Senator Nelson asked me to join him on stage at the university on the very first Earth Day. Well, that legacy led me to do a number of things. For example, my last tenure as mayor of Madison asked for a study on lead fixtures in our water pipes. Now, there isn't a single fixture in Madison, Wisconsin, served by our water utility that has lead. And that is a standard we'll set for the entire state. Now, we all know about the canary in the coal mine. And I'm beginning to think we've got a similar situation here in Wisconsin with all the dead deer on the road, decaying, rotting, and left to spread disease. And the question is, what does that represent in the present administration? It represents that they don't care. Scott Walker does not care about the environment. He doesn't care about the pollution. He doesn't care about the disease. But what we do in this state, the people of this state, we do care. That's why Madison, like other cities in the state, despite what Donald Trump did when he came into office, signed on to abiding by the Paris Accords, committed to make change and do what we can within our individual municipalities to fight global warming. And we, as a state, can do that with the right governor. Fortunately, every one of us here will meet that challenge.
On to the next question. What should the state do to guarantee access to high quality and affordable health care for all citizens?
Ultimately, I think that what has to happen is that Medicare is going to have to cover everybody from birth to death. The truth is that even people in the business community in Milwaukee I talk to say, you know, I'd almost rather pay a higher Medicare tax than the exorbitant premiums I'm paying to private insurance companies where there are no cost controls, because a major part of the problem is cost control. And obviously there'd have to be some adjustments because Medicare doesn't fully pay a lot of lower level providers, and so there would be some issues there, but ultimately I think that's what's going to happen. However, the governor of Wisconsin can't order that, can't do that, so what would I do as governor? Well, first of all, I would get that $1 billion back that he turned down for Medicaid supplements. That is the return of our federal tax dollars. We get very little back in this state. We're an exporter of federal dollars. When I was in the Navy, there are ports all over the South and the West, and there should be. They have great ports and harbors. We get nothing. He turns down $1 billion of our own tax money and $800 million in train money, I would go out and get both of them back, but that $1 billion would substantially help the effort to get more health care in the state. The second thing that I would do would be to open up Badger Care to everybody in the state as a public option and the exchange. And the reason I would do that is this. 70,000 people roughly were thrown off of health care when he turned down the $1 billion. Now, you know that when 70,000 people suddenly lose their health care, somebody dies earlier than they had to. And that, to me, is a moral question. It was wrong of him to do it. And he did it because he was running for president and wanted to show, in contrast to John Kasich of Ohio, who had taken the money, and Chris Christie of New Jersey, who had taken the money, that he was a so-called true conservative. And without batting an eye, he did that and injured his own state. And I think that that was wrong. But in addition to that, I would appoint an insurance commissioner, and I hope work with Attorney General Josh Call, who will stand up to the insurance companies. I would tell our Attorney General, sue the ones that are marketing these opioids and know very well they're being abused because they can target it to different doctors. I would also make the insurance companies cover long-term care more. Thank you very much.
I had the great pleasure on Friday to spend several hours at the Wisconsin Dental Association, Mission University in Milwaukee. It's one of those situations that was frankly life-changing for me. And I grew up with a physician and a nurse in the family, and my daughter's a physician. But to see the need in this state, it was just extraordinary. I talked to a dentist from Mount Horeb that I knew, and he had, by 7 o'clock in the morning, extracted 22 teeth, honest to God. And the line outside of State Fair Park went on for blocks. They did everything they could. They took x-rays there, they cleaned teeth there, they extracted teeth there, they had partial bridges installed and created there. It was unbelievable. I'll never forget it as long as I live. The work that was done by all those professionals, with all those people that are needy in the city of Milwaukee. Now the problem with that is it's not solving the problem. There's a basic problem of access to health care. There's a basic problem to make sure that people do preventative care so that they don't have to have 2 or 3 teeth extracted at a free clinic. What I'll do as governor to help on this is to make sure that we take that Medicaid money. That's an absolute necessity. We have to make sure that we set up those exchanges correctly. There is a reason why the people in Minnesota pay half the price for the same care as we get here. It's half the price. I was in La Crosse not a long time ago, frankly, where someone was going to actually move across the river to live in Minnesota and still work in La Crosse just to get the better health insurance. This state has, and Scott Walker has completely screwed that up. The other thing that I'll promise you as governor, we will never ever have pre-existing conditions impacting the way you get your health insurance. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm particularly cognizant of that issue, and that will never happen under my watch. We need more transparency and accountability, and the red flag is out.
Well, I'll certainly take the actions that all of us have recommended in terms of embracing a more robust Medicaid system and understanding that we have to work eventually towards some kind of single payer system. We have to use our influence in 2 other areas. One, in relationship to the cost of pharmaceuticals, and the second, the fact that reimbursement in Wisconsin on Medicare payments is so low compared to other states. And this is an issue where we have to work with the federal government. But I want to recommend a book, and it's not about health care. The book is by Professor Sharkey at NYU, and it's called Uneasy Peace. And what's important about it is his identification of the role of citizens, not government employees, but citizens in making transformations. And I'm going to give an example. Back in the 1990s in Madison, we instituted a program which expanded health care throughout the community, and we utilized residents of the neighborhoods. Now, no one has scientifically backed up what I'm about to say, but you'll have to trust me on it. Trust me. In the second year after the new system was put in place, for 7 successive years, African American infant mortality declined till it reached a point of being at the national numbers down to white infant mortality. Research was done, studies have been done, and no one can figure out what happened medically to make a difference. But there was one thing. Now, we call them navigators today, and it was the use of navigators, I believe, reaching into the community, residents of the community, that bridge the gap. And that is one of the most effective things that we can do, whether we're talking about urban communities in the state or if we're talking about rural communities in the state. And it's not just in terms of health care, at least as we think of it. It's in terms of building community, building safe places, nurturing places, and making a difference as to how people are able to access the resources that so many people in the state justly deserve but cannot get to today. I want to make the point that this is true in other areas. 1/3 of Madison's police and fire budget goes for incidents that derive out of mental and behavioral health. More later.
Health care is a right, period. In 2018, everyone should have access to high-quality health care that doesn't break the bank. And we can do it. We can afford it. Not only is it the right thing to do morally, it's good for our economy. And I know this because I'm a small business owner. And 6 years ago, when I left the state assembly, I started my own company. And one of the biggest challenges that I have faced in growing it is being able to find employees and providing them with high-quality, affordable insurance. It's tremendously costly for small businesses like me. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky because my business succeeded. I'm lucky I was able to start that business because we got health insurance through my husband's employer. Think about all the economic potential that we could unleash if we made it more easy for people to become entrepreneurs, to take that step, or to go join a startup. We're dead last in the nation in new businesses like mine, and those are the real job creators. That's where the majority of net new jobs comes from. So we've got to think about this in a smart way, economically. But to turn to the healthcare policy for a minute, we all care about healthcare and want to deliver more to people. And that's why we all want to take the Medicaid money. We're all going to make Badger Care a public option. And it's great that we have those values. But I'm the person on this stage who's actually done it. When I was in the Assembly, I served as the vice chair of the Committee on Health. And we helped expand Badger Care access to 80,000 Wisconsinites who previously didn't have coverage. I was one of the co-authors of the Healthy Wisconsin Plan, which is Senator Reinhart's bill. We need that commitment and the ability to get things done. In fact, the issue that drove me to run for the Assembly was healthcare because I had been the executive director of NARAL Pro-Choice Wisconsin. I traveled all over the state defending reproductive rights because that is a critical component of healthcare too, and working on issues like infant mortality to try to reduce the racial disparities that we see in healthcare outcomes around our state. That's why I've been endorsed by Demand Universal Healthcare. That's why I've been endorsed by NARAL Pro-Choice America, and that's why I've been endorsed by Emily's List, all groups that care about access to health care and specifically reproductive rights. And finally, I'll just say, we need to make sure that every child comes into life and gets a healthy start. And that's why I support universal paid family leave to make sure everyone's healthy from the beginning.
Growing up on the farm, I have to tell you that I was not covered by health insurance of any kind until I was 22 years old. Because our family had to make the choice, if we were going to keep our farm profitable, to forego health insurance. So you just didn't go to the doctor unless you had a limb hanging from a couple of threads. That's among the reasons why I feel so passionately that America needs a national solution. We need a single-payer Medicare-for-all system in this country. But I also want Wisconsin to be a leader. I'm not running for Congress, and I sure as heck am not running for president. So I want Wisconsin to become a national model for the country to follow. And to do that, we need to correct two mistakes and then do one other thing. We need to correct the mistake that Wisconsin made when we did not accept the Medicaid expansion money. We need to take that money and expand Badger Care access to more than 80,000 people. We also need to correct another mistake. We did not set up our own state health insurance exchange under the Affordable Care Act, and we should correct that mistake and set up an insurance exchange, and then we should take the additional step and make Badger Care a public option and put it on that exchange and make it an option for anyone to choose who feels that that's the best insurance for them. Badger Care should be there for all Badgers. But then we need to do one other thing. A moment ago, we had a question about how we would best protect the environment. But I'll tell you this, we're not going to get clean air and clean water out of dirty politics, nor will we get good health care out of a sick political system. When you've got polluters owning our government, when you've got pharmaceutical companies and healthcare conglomerates owning our government, we're not going to get policy made in the public interest. We have got to deal with the cancer growing in the body of our democracy, and we've got to cut that cancer out. It's cronyism, it's corruption, it's what amounts to legal bribery that has been allowed to take root in our system. It has got to be uprooted. It's been my life's work to shine light and expose that corruption, and that has to go into the governor's office, that commitment to getting us a government that will work for all of us and not just a privileged few at the very top. It's that will get us action on good health care.
Well, healthcare is a moral obligation that we have for each other. And there is a big difference between slogans and policy. Repeal and replace was a slogan, but when it came right down to the details, folks in Washington on the other side of the aisle didn't know how to fix it, and that idea died. Medicare-for-all, healthcare for all, Medicare-for-all, those are slogans, and I use them. I'm not criticizing that. But when it comes right down to it, figuring out how to fix healthcare is difficult and it takes a long time. One of my heroes is Tommy Douglas. He was the premier of Saskatchewan, and he was the father of the Canadian Medicare-for-all system. It took him 28 years to pass Medicare-for-all. Now, once it passed in Saskatchewan, it actually got passed at the federal level in only 4 years. But it took a whole lot of people and a whole lot of smart people to figure out the details. So to put in place a healthcare-for-all system, we've got to have the money. How are we going to come up with the money? Where are we going to find it? How are we going to shuffle things around so we have the money? We've got to have a way of paying for it. We've got to have a delivery system. We have to have if there's no community clinic in your neighborhood, it doesn't matter if there's healthcare for all, if you can't get access. And we've got to have the providers. Yesterday I talked with a midwife, a certified nurse midwife, who did home births, and she said from the day the woman is pregnant until that baby is healthy and on his or her way, I only get $1,050 for the whole thing for Medicaid patients. I can't afford to do my job the way I'm doing it. We have to change that or we're going to lose the providers. And we've got to have measures of quality. We've got to know what's working and what's not and where it's working. All these things have to be in place to create the kind of system that we're talking about. Healthcare is my passion. It's where I've done my work as a university professor. It's where I've done my education. It's also the other side of the coin is what happened when I was a full-time dairy farmer. We went for 23 months without health insurance. We, our family, me and my son and my husband, had to make that difficult decision, sell the cows or drop the health insurance. I have done everything that I'm talking to you about. I was one of 3 authors in the Senate to write Healthcare for All. It's a plan called Healthy Wisconsin. We introduced in the Senate 3 years before Obamacare passed. We covered everyone and saved $1 billion. When that didn't work, I went back to work and put together a group package of bills that the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel said the biggest changes in insurance in 10 years. I wrote the bill on the exchange. We need somebody who knows the details. Thank you.
We have over 300,000 Wisconsinites in the state that have no health care whatsoever. That's a problem. I agree with all my colleagues here that we should have taken the federal dollars in the Medicaid expansion. That would have put another 84,700 folks under the Medicaid program, Medicare. So I'm a firefighter by nature. I've been on the job 20 years, and we like to keep things simple. You know, as fires get more complex, as our building construction gets more complex, what we do changes, but at the end of the day, it stays the same. We put the wet stuff on the hot stuff. And at the end of the day, it's simple to me. Everyone in the state should have health care. It's a right. It shouldn't be an option. It shouldn't be just an opportunity that you have, or you should just have access to it. You should actually have health care. There should never be a time where a child doesn't go to the hospital because their parents can't afford it. My mother's a diabetic. There should never be a time where a senior has to choose between paying for their prescription drugs or paying the rent or their mortgage. You know, a lot of people on the far right, conservatives, will say, well, everyone should have the opportunity to have health care. Well, having the opportunity, or maybe just trying to have the access, is essential to, if we were to go down the street to the local dealership, we would have the opportunity to buy a Porsche. Right? You have the opportunity. You can go there, talk to the dealership, pick out your Porsche, get your loan. But at the end of the day, your opportunity, when you drive off the lot, can you afford the actual monthly payments? Most people cannot. I know I can. So it's not just about the opportunity or access, it's actually being able to afford co-pays, being able to afford healthcare premiums, being able to afford deductibles. And we can do that. I think we all are in agreement here with the single payer option, Medicare-for-all. But we have to actually, that's one of the first things I will tackle as your governor, making sure that not only we have the opportunity for health care, but making sure that all the 300,000 Wisconsinites that don't have health care right now will have not just adequate health care, but also have access to health care, and that we can do that. And that's not just, again, a moral obligation. It's one that we can do in our state, and we can be a leader in the country.
Starting off with Mayor Suckland, what is the importance of a living minimum wage, and what do you see as a viable approach?
During my first tenure as mayor, a number of business leaders in Madison came to see me and made a request. And the request was that we stop increasing municipal employee wages along with the benefits they got in terms of health insurance and pensions. And the reason was that they found to get quality employees, they were going to have to match what we did. Well, I think you can all imagine what the answer was. No. Now, here we are a few years later, and you can see that the city's economy and the city's business community did not suffer having to compete for quality workers. The point is this: if you want quality work, you pay quality people with quality compensation, and this is really critical, you make sure it happens in both the private and the public sector. Now, one of the things that we were able to do in Madison a couple years ago was implement a $15 an hour minimum wage for city employees. We can't do it in the private sector because Governor Walker and the Republican-controlled legislature won't allow us to do it. But you can see the intent and what we did. So we're in the second, actually next year will be the third year, and next year, 2019, there will be no city employee making less than $15 an hour. And we are raising the bar. We're raising the bar for the private sector. We have to get to $15 an hour in this state for all workers. And we have to make sure that everyone has health insurance and that we take care of the pensions. I want to go back to Foxconn. We still don't know what Foxconn is costing per employee. I've heard $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. We negotiated an agreement with a company in Madison, Exact Sciences, just recently, and that cost $6,000 an employee on the TIF, $15 an hour, pensions, and health insurance. It can be done.
Here are data that I think it's important to keep in mind as I lay out my own action items. The median wage adjusted for inflation in Wisconsin today is lower, adjusted for inflation, the real wage, lower than it was 10 years ago. Right now it's under $18 an hour. 10 years ago it was slightly over $18 an hour, the real wage. Something like 60% of the people in the state make less than $40,000 a year. The minimum wage in 1968, the minimum wage adjusted for inflation was over $10 an hour. Now it's 70% of that. What's happened is, with all the data about low unemployment, there's a wage starvation going on in this state. And that's not only immoral and bad, but it's bad for the economy in general. I would do a lot of things. I would repeal Act 10 right away, repeal right to work, put back in prevailing wage, put back, and raise the minimum wage. The ultimate object is $15 an hour. It was $10 an hour in 1968, adjusted for inflation. But I do want to get back to a theme that I think is very, very important. And that is, when I talked about Foxconn before, do you remember when they first unveiled this, they said that the average wage would be $53,000 a year. Everybody I knew in Milwaukee said, great, I'm going to make $53,000 a year. You know what I said? I said, if Bill Gates and a homeless person were in the corner talking, their average net worth is $40 billion. The problem is Bill Gates is worth $80 billion and the other gentleman has no net worth. It was a sneaky statistic, and when I called them on it, they said, okay, but the median will be, and then they fudged that too. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to be paying about $12 an hour. And this is such an improvident investment. All our eggs in one basket with a lot of Illinois workers in an industry that's going to be robotized, and they don't even know what they're going to make. It's criminal negligence, if not fraud, and it must be stopped, and I will stop it. I want wages in the state to go up by portion in all 72 counties, raising the minimum wage, yes, with the objective of $15 an hour, but breathing cash and life back into our economy. Thank you.
I'm a small business owner, as I said, and so I understand that it is challenging for business owners, and especially when you're just starting out, to figure out how you're going to make ends meet. But I'll tell you one thing. If you want to have workers stick around, and you want to have an economy that works, you need to make sure that people have money in their pockets that they can spend. Because that is what drives demand, and that is how you get a virtuous cycle of an economy that is working for everyone. Now, I do think we should move our minimum wage over a period of years up to $15 an hour, and I think that we should allow local communities to decide for themselves their own policies if they needed to be at a higher level. Because it's more expensive to live in Madison than it is to live in, Marinette County. So we can do those things. And I also think we should restore collective bargaining rights in the public and private sector so that workers have a voice in the workplace and can bargain for their working conditions or their wages and their benefits. But today's my 39th birthday. And so I hope I can be alive for a long time. 40, 50 years more, maybe even 60. Maybe they'll robotize us. But I'm thinking about the workforce, not just in 2 years and 4 years. I'm thinking about how is our workforce and our economy going to change in the next 20 and 30 and 40 years when my kids are entering the prime of their careers. And it's very different from the world that my parents and grandparents inhabited. There's no gold watch at the end of 40 years. We started our lives in debt, with student debt, thousands of dollars. So we have to address that. If we want people to be economically successful. It's not just about wages. We have to disaggregate. We have to separate people having basic benefits like paid family and sick leave, like access to great child care, like health care, like access to a public pension system in the Wisconsin retirement. We have to separate these benefits from work so that when people are going in and out of the workforce, whether they're taking time off to care for a loved one or if they get sick themselves, whether they want to start a small business, we have to ensure that they can still have those basic fundamental things that make up a good life, a stable life. And when we do that, we are going to unleash so much potential in our economy as people are able to move jobs, as people are going to come to Wisconsin. It's going to be a destination state for people my age and people my stepdaughter's age who's just graduated from high school and is going off to Minnesota to college. And I hope she comes back to Wisconsin because she's going to find it a place where not only can she earn a decent wage, but she knows that she's going to have access to health care, she's going to be able to buy into a safe, stable public pension system like the Wisconsin retirement system. She's going to have paid leave, and she's going to have a life in Wisconsin, regardless of what her employment situation is, that's going to help her be middle class. These are the kinds of long-term investments that we need to make in our state.
Thank you. Moving to a living wage is the Wisconsin way to do things. It's consistent with our history. I support a living wage of $15 an hour that's indexed to inflation, and this is consistent with what we have done as a state. Back in 1912, there was a work group that was put together by folks at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and people in the legislature that created the legislation that made Wisconsin one of the first, not the first. Massachusetts was the first, but one of the first to create a living wage in Wisconsin. And living wage was defined as how much it took to actually live. This was 1913 when the law was passed. Now, because of a variety of issues at the court level, it wasn't until the 1930s that it was fully implemented with the Supreme Court decision that was decided by one vote. Another one of those one-vote decisions. And when we look back on history, what we see is consistent raises with the minimum wage over and over and over again. In the 1970s, almost every year in that decade, the living wage was increased. And then came the 1980s and Ronald Reagan, and the tone totally changed. The commission that set the living wage was dissolved, and we see where we're at today. Now, to think a little bit about what it means with the Foxconn issue, which I completely do not support, if you took $100 bills and laid them end to end to get to that $3 billion that Foxconn got, you would get from here all the way up through Seattle and down the coast to San Francisco. $100 bills laid end to end. But if you took a minimum wage earner from Racine working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, that poor woman wouldn't get from her door to the sidewalk. That needs to change.
Some of you look like you're sleeping, so we're going to have an exercise here. When people that are middle class, or we always talk about middle class, but what about people that live below middle class wages? If they have more money in their pocket, what do they do with it? Spend it. We all said spend it. And if they spend it, then what happens? Our economy goes up. We all rise together, right? So economics, quite frankly, is simple. If we give people that are middle class wages, or people that live below middle class wages, more money, they're going to spend it. If people have more money in their pocket, then that's more goods and services that need to be produced. When people are spending more money and more goods and services need to be produced, that means we need more jobs and workers, right? So, this is simple. Yes, we should do $15 an hour. If you go to my website, we have a plan called Raising Wages and Restoring Power to Working People. It not only talks about raising wages at $15 an hour as a floor, but it goes further than that, because what you can get in Marquette County or Adams County or Marinette County are not what you can get in Milwaukee or Waukesha or Dane County. So $15 an hour is a floor, but we're going to set up sectoral commissions where we have employers, employees, as well as governor-appointed civilians to sit down and talk about hours, wages, working conditions. That's how we get back to actually collective bargaining. That's how we get back to having employer-employee peace. That's how we make sure that we all rise together. We have over 1.1-ish million people that make under $15 an hour right now. If we were to just give them $15 an hour, that would be over $10 billion in purchasing power that we would have around our state. Imagine if we can unlock that into our economy. So we make the economy rise from the bottom up, not from the top down. Top-down economics and trickle-down economics defies common sense, logic, and history. And that's my time.
Okay. Thank you, Lieutenant.
I know there's lots of teachers and retired teachers in the audience, but I will, just to remind you the things that you don't want to hear. But when Act 10 came into place, from there to today, the average teacher wage in the state of Wisconsin has gone down 8.5%. And that does not include what came out of your pockets for various fringe benefits. So, living wage, I guess, but I can tell you it's just barely. And it's playing out. It's playing out in a way that's exceedingly important to our state's economy and our democracy, in that we have fewer and fewer people wanting to get into the profession. That aside. I remember when I was a kid, I watched, can't remember how old, but watching Martin Luther King march on Washington. He gave that wonderful speech. That speech people may have forgotten about, or haven't forgotten about. Well, one thing they may have forgotten about, that whole march was about a living wage. And if we had implemented that living wage at that time, our minimum wage right now would be $15 an hour. So we need to not miss a point like that again. And we're not rebounding very well from the recession. We just saw it in today's Journal Sentinel that we are, we're not leaping ahead with the new economy, and things aren't going well here in Wisconsin. Wages are stagnant. So here's the things that I feel are important. Obviously, affordable health care will have more take-home pay, but I also support a minimum wage, and like Bernie Sanders talked about, making sure it happens over a period of time. I'm a huge supporter of collective bargaining. I spoke against the implementation of Act 10. I continue to do it. I used to negotiate for WEAC. We can change right to work. We can change prevailing wage. We can make these recertification not the hurdle that it is now. We can have dues deductions for people. That is critically important. But I will tell you that it is so important for the state of Wisconsin. I know we're going to talk about it later, but infrastructure jobs are family supporting jobs, and it's a 2-for-1. If we improve our infrastructure in the state of Wisconsin, it's good for transportation and other things, but it's also good for our economy with high-paying family supporting jobs. Thank you.
I hear people saying that everything must be fine with Wisconsin's economy because the unemployment rate is pretty low. And I'll grant you, you can find work out there, but it's really hard for an awful lot of people to find work that keeps their heads above water. In fact, recent reports showed that if you're a minimum wage worker, you need 3 jobs to afford an apartment in Wisconsin. So I'll grant you, people can find work out there, and I run into an awful lot of people who are doing 2 or 3 jobs. But here's the thing, in Wisconsin, if you work, you belong in the middle class. And that means committing our state to a living wage for every worker. We've got to do away with the minimum wage and turn it into a true living wage. And we got to get rid of the wage suppression policies that have been put in place. But that really requires us to just do an about-face in the whole way we go about building a sturdy economy. Wisconsin's been trying to build that economy from the top down, feeding the rich, showering tax breaks and state subsidies on a few at the very top with the hopes that they'll work some magic for the rest of us. No, we've got to do the exact opposite and use our state's resources to empower close to 6 million people in this state to do more for themselves and for each other. We've got to build that sturdy economy from the bottom up. I call it geyser economics because economic prosperity does not trickle down, it gushes up. And that does mean putting more money in the pockets of working people because when they have it, they will spend it. And when they spend it, somebody's got to sell what they want to buy, and that stimulates the economy. We've got to challenge that propaganda that higher wages kill jobs. No, low wages are a killer for the economy. They suppress demand and they inhibit sales. We've got to challenge that propaganda. But again, just as we won't get clean air and clean water out of dirty politics or good health care out of a sick political system, we won't get living wages out of a dying democracy either. When the folks at the very top own our government, they want wage suppression policies because they profit from it. We've got to have a government dedicated to being on the side of working people. And when we have the government on the side of working people, then we will see our economy prosper. We will see that geyser economics. We will see that prosperity gush up.
How would you prioritize transportation needs and payment for both urban and rural communities? And I think the payment question is going to be very important. So, first off, Malin Mitchell.
I would prioritize transportation by one. I believe we have to index the gas tax because there's only so much revenue. In order to actually provide good transportation, to have good roads, we have to actually have revenue. And quite frankly, the only way to have revenue, or one of the only ways to have revenue, is to actually index the gas tax. So we don't have to have this conversation every 2 years in a biennial budget on how we're going to actually make our roads a priority. Our roads are not, we have the second worst roads in the country. Our roads suck. I mean, I've traveled, all the candidates up here are traveling our roads all the time, and you're hitting potholes. I think the average Wisconsinite is spending over $600 a year more because our roads are horrible for maintenance costs. So we need to make it a priority. And it's not only one of how do we get back and forth to work, but it's one about how it's about public safety, which is near and dear to my heart. So I believe we need to index the gas tax. I believe when it comes to transportation, if we're going to have this Foxconn fiasco here in the state, that we need to make sure that people that are underemployed, like on the north side of Milwaukee, that don't have jobs, don't have family-sustaining jobs, have the ability to actually get out to Foxconn. So we need to set up a regional transit authority to make sure that folks can get out to Foxconn and have those jobs. Those jobs need to stay here in the state. So if we're going to have 13,000 jobs, they first should be make sure that a priority that we're not paying for people from Illinois to actually have jobs, that they all stay right here in Wisconsin and they go to people that are underemployed right now. So transportation is one of our biggest issues. I've been endorsed by the operating engineers, and if you didn't know, the operating engineers endorsed Scott Walker the last 3 times. Those are 10,000 men and women that help build roads across the state. They've endorsed my campaign. It's because of my stance on infrastructure and transportation. We have $1 billion deficit right now that we need to fill, and we can do that by indexing the gas tax and also making sure, and I look at it as a user fee, not a tax, because the more you drive, the more you actually use it. But thank you.
If you're driving to Wausau, or you're driving from Wausau, you will see 2 outdoor signs that show Scott Walker crawling out of a pothole, and they call them Scott holes. And, well, they should. Governor Walker drew the line in the sand. No new taxes. Only way we're going to change our transportation system is through borrowing. We cannot do that anymore. We are almost dead last in the country, as mentioned before, and we can't afford that. We have people in northern Wisconsin that they're actually scraping the asphalt off of the roads, and so that we're going back to gravel roads. How about that for going back to the future? Let's advertise that on the trains in the Illinois Metro coming up, bringing the workers to Foxconn. Come move to Wisconsin. You can drive on gravel roads. The bottom line is, wherever you are in the state of Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, where you're filling potholes, we've taken away local control, the ability to people to raise money, people doing wheel taxes. There's just absolutely no way around this. We have to invest. Western Wisconsin, talk about bridges. We've downgraded the bridges just this last week in western Wisconsin, so now it's going to take 2 or 3 trips from the farm to the market to get things there because we're afraid that the bridges are going to collapse. So we need to do something about transportation. We need to do something about what transportation issues are around mass transit in the urban areas. We need to invest. Yes, gas tax should be on the table. Yes, toll roads should be on the table. Yes, cuts should be on the table. But whatever we do, we cannot, the status quo isn't going to work, folks. We need to have a strong infrastructure. We need to have a strong transportation system. If we want to be economically developed and competitive across the country, we need to do these things. And we can. That's the problem. This is an issue that we can solve. The Republicans get it. Who represents all those places in northern Wisconsin that has the issues around transportation? Republicans. They get it. We can change this. This will be one of the first things we do as governor.
So Malin mentioned that the operating engineers had endorsed Governor Pothole a number of years ago. I'm not sure I'd want the endorsement of somebody who had endorsed Scott Walker, but getting on to the substance of all of this. There is operating costs and there's capital costs. In terms of responsible government, you should try and keep your debt service just as a family would try to keep the money each month that it is setting aside to pay off loans. Government, you want to try and keep it at around 12, 13%. If you creep up to 15% of your monthly budget, you're in trouble. I have not had a chance to personally look at the numbers, but my understanding is that we're pushing 20% in regards to transportation costs. So we're already over the top. The first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out how to get that number down to at least 15%, if not lower. Now, there's several ways of doing that. The first way of doing it is to raise our revenues. That means we have to increase the gas tax. There's just no question about it. It's a no-brainer. It's required. The second thing that we have to do is we have to realize that we have malappropriated our transportation dollars to one corner of the state to help a Chinese company that is laughing at us for the stupid. I mean, how did we ever, I mean, what were they thinking? But the point is, those dollars have to be redistributed around the state so we get balanced transportation. And it means we have to not only deal with the roads, the town roads, the county highways, the state highways, but we also have to deal with public transportation. Public transportation and the transition to electric buses is in our future, and we better understand that now. Thank you.
I live in a very hilly part of the state. I represent western Wisconsin and the Driftless area. And there are many, many bridges that are critical to our communities. I have been advocating for bridge funding for a long time, and the most stark example that I recently remember was checking out a bridge that had been closed because it was deteriorating so much that it wasn't safe anymore, and the residents called me and said, please come to our neighborhood. And I went to the bridge, and across the bridge, and it was wintertime, were little tiny shoe footprints coming across this deteriorated bridge, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The only way the children had to get on the bus was to walk across this deteriorating bridge. And that shows how critical the infrastructure problems are around the state. Doesn't matter where you go. We were just in Juneteenth Day and in Milwaukee, and I talked with folks that were just coming off of a really big car repair because the potholes here, but they're all over the state. How do we fix the problem? I've written 4 alternatives to the governor's budget, and I have looked at the numbers. And I agree, we have to raise the gas tax, we have to index it, but that only gets us about 1/3 of the way. So there are other issues we need to deal with. We need to change the mix so that the state doesn't spend so much money on big, huge mega projects, and move some of that money to local roads, local bridges, local repair. We need to put back the money into transit. Why is Milwaukee closing down bus routes? Because the state has not fully funded transit like it needs to. We need alternatives. We need the RTAs to come back. We need trains. I'd love to take a train from Alma to Madison to go to work.
I lived on a gravel road, and when I was growing up, I always assumed that road would one day be paved, because that's the natural order of progress. That's what I thought. It's still gravel to this day, but that's not what troubles me. What troubles me is how many local townships are digging up pavement and putting down gravel because they can't afford to fill their potholes. And it's because Wisconsin's current transportation policy is based on the 2 most irresponsible options imaginable: neglect of basic upkeep and heavy reliance on borrowing for what spending is done. To the point where now, under the budget that we're operating under today, over 23 cents out of every dollar we pay in gas taxes doesn't go to pave anything. It goes to debt repayment. And listen, we can't have a good economy and bad roads. And Wisconsin used to be known as having some of the finest roads in America. Now we've got among the worst. And so we got to change our transportation policy so we don't rely on those 2 irresponsible options. And instead, we got to, first of all, pay as we pave. That does mean restoring inflationary adjustments to the gas tax so that revenue keeps up with expense. We have to pay as we pave, but then we also have to prioritize basic upkeep. Before new construction, before expansion, we have to make sure that we take care of what we've already got. And that is important for urban communities, it's important for rural areas. That means a fundamental adjustment in what's underneath state transportation policy. Because what we're doing now has led us to ruin. It has led us to having really poor roads compared to the rest of the country when we used to have some of the finest. And of course, If we ever get another opportunity to take $800 million for high-speed rail, we got to take it. And in fact, we should be reaching out to Illinois and Minnesota about a three-state partnership to make that happen and find a way to make it happen.
Thank you very much. Let me set out the challenge and then the action items I'd do and how I'd pay for them. The challenge is this. We do have 49 out of 50 the worst roads in the country. This administration has done nothing but debt and neglect. That's been their approach, and they will do nothing in terms of an expenditure unless there's a commensurate tax reduction somewhere else, typically for people in the upper wage earning levels. This has all got to stop. I would not do tolls. That's a legitimate point of disagreement. Tolls are inefficient. Something like over 20% of the tolls go to administration. I would reindex the gas tax, number one. I would go back and get that $800 million in train money that he turned down to look like a conservative when he was running for president, which is why he did it, which would have linked trains Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Minnesota. And you know where they would have been built? 35th and North, the old A.O. Smith plant. I don't know if you knew Ollie Thompson, a good friend of mine. Ollie was not a well-educated man. He never had the chance to get an education, but he made an excellent union wage there. We could have done that again, 4,000 union jobs, and he just turned it down to look like a conservative. That was our money. We have no ships. The Navy hardly ever comes here. Well, it does come here. I'm in the Navy League of Milwaukee, and we commission a ship. It goes to a lot of effort to get out through the St. Lawrence Seaway and out into the Atlantic. But that was a criminal thing for him to have done. But when reference is made to Foxconn, there's some difference of opinion. We cannot stop Illinois people from working at Foxconn under the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And my concept of suing them, a couple $100 million taken out of the transportation budget just to service Foxconn. That's just not right. But one of the things we have to keep in mind is they were also exempted from the Court of Appeals jurisdiction. So if they sue and lose in Racine, it goes right to the Republican Supreme Court. I have a way to get into federal court for federal jurisdiction, which will put it into the Chicago Court of Appeals. That's a lot of inside baseball, a lot in the weeds. I've thought about this a lot. If we don't stop Foxconn, we will not only hurt our budgets, but it extends to transportation as well. Thank you.
So I think my colleagues have done a very admirable job of outlining the problem. And anyone who drives on the roads understands that. Anyone who tries to use cell phone when you're on vacation understands the problem. It's not just the roads and the bridges and the ports and the rails. It's the 21st century infrastructure that we're not building. And I think actually Tommy Thompson might have been the last governor that we really put together a long-term infrastructure plan. And we need that. We need a governor who has a long-term perspective, who's going to think about the future and be willing to fund it. And so here's my vision for infrastructure in Wisconsin. Not just for the next 2 or 4 years, but for the next 20, 30, and 40 years down the line. We're going to restore our reputation as a state with great roads, and we're going to not put it on the credit card for my kids to pay for. We're going to pay as we pave by indexing the gas tax and raising it a modest amount. And by making those high-capacity commercial vehicles, the ones that are taking all that mined frac sand up and down our highways that are really the ones destroying the roads, we're going to make them pay their fair share in user fees. We're going to also make sure that we get all the federal money for transportation that we possibly can. Because we pay a lot in federal taxes, and we've been sending that money back, not just for the train, which I want, but for broadband connectivity. Because we cannot have an economy that functions if we don't make it possible for people to do their work, and that means connecting to the modern world with broadband connectivity and wireless connectivity. We're going to make it possible for Wisconsin to connect with the economic and cultural hubs of Chicago and the Twin Cities through Madison and Milwaukee. We're going to build that passenger rail corridor, and we're going to upgrade our freight, because that is a very efficient way to move goods. We need to have better movement of people and goods. That's really what infrastructure is about. And we're going to upgrade our public buildings, whether it's public schools, whether it's municipal buildings through shared revenue, or whether it's state office buildings, and make sure that they are green, that they are well kept, that they are healthy for people, and we remove toxins that could harm human health.
So in what ways would you guarantee quality, affordable education for all state citizens I mean, if you saw the article that was in the New York Times this week about the small town of Arena where they're losing their small school, that's a problem there, but it's also a problem over here by the lake in the city of Milwaukee because we've got some very deep problems that need to be dealt with. And one final thing, where would you see the role of vouchers in the educational picture in Wisconsin, considering that it's estimated about 30,000 kids will be on vouchers by the end of Scott Walker's term?
Well, thank you. I serve on the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding Reform, so I've had a lot of experience in the last couple of months traveling the state, learning about the stories. But I've also spent a lot of time thinking about not only how we change the formula, but how we pay for it. Right now, there are big changes happening among the children that our public schools educate. We've seen a doubling of poverty over a decade, a big increase in special needs, an increase in English learners. Green Bay, for example, has 22% of their children are English learners, including 600 Somali students. We've seen an increase in mental health needs, children facing trauma. And all of these students need more resources. But our main formula, the primary way that schools are provided money, does not account for any of these different methods or needs of the students. In the state that has the largest achievement gap, poverty and ethnicity is not part of our primary mode of funding schools. So what do we need to do? We need to get rid of the antiquated idea of basing schools on property values and instead fund schools based on need, based on children's need. We need to get rid of the crazy idea of punishing schools that are doing poorly. How do we fix MPS? By recognizing that 88% of the kids are of color and 80% are children in poverty, and link the changes in the population and the needs of the student population with the money that's coming from the state. And we can do this by rearranging the same amount of money in the governor's budget. I have written 4 alternatives to the governor's budget since he took over. It's a 2-year budget, and I've showed how to change the way we fund schools. I've showed how to do it with the same dollars. Thank you.
There's a lot of things that we can spend money on, but it's hard for me to think about something that's a more important investment for us to make than in our kids. And so we have to become the education state once again. We're famous for a lot of things, for cheese curds and the Packers, and I love it. But when I was growing up, we were also famous for public education, and that is what we need to do again. And it starts not just with restoring K-12 funding and making sure that we have an equitable funding formula, as Senator Vina just laid out, but it also starts with making a commitment to early childhood education. Because we don't want to have that opportunity gap, which is already starting in kindergarten. We want to make sure every child has the opportunity that my children have to go to a great, high-quality childcare center, regardless of what zip code they're in or what county they live in. We also need to make sure that access to higher education is available to everyone, and that we use a last dollar tuition credit to make 2-year technical colleges free for any Wisconsin resident. It's absolutely basic to our economy. And I think there's a lot of agreement on, the issue of expanding access to K-12 and higher ed. But there are some real policy differences amongst the candidates for governor on what we should do with the move to privatization. Because there's a lot of people that want put their hands in the public purse. And I believe that public dollars are for public schools, period. Period. There's a giant sucking sound, and it's the privatization, folks. It's the voucher schools and it's the charters, the non-instrumentality private charters that are being allowed and even encouraged to proliferate here. I have a responsible plan to bring the failed 27-year experiment that is voucher schools to a responsible end. We need to stop experimenting on children who can least afford it, and understanding that the results show it's no better, and in many cases the results are worse. We also need to take a strong stand against private charters. Any public money should be publicly accountable. And that means there needs to be an elected school board that's actually saying, yes, this is the school we want to do, and that there's some real accountability there. And that's a major difference. So I encourage you to look at our stances.
There should be a basic rule for government that if a program works, you keep it and fund it. And if a program doesn't work, you get rid of it. And by that standard, we should end taxpayer-subsidized private schooling. The voucher program should end. Because Wisconsin has been trying to go down a road where we're trying to sustain two separate and parallel systems of education, and we're not doing justice by one. In fact, what's happening is we're siphoning resources away from community schools and badly weakening them. The promise is that it was going to boost student achievement, and it has not. After 27 years, voucher students don't do any better than their public school counterparts. By some measures, they do worse. The promise also was that it would boost school improvement, that it would drive school improvement. It hasn't done that either. It's siphoned resources away and weakened schools. Arena Elementary School closed. Darien Elementary School closed. They don't have the funds to continue to operate. Dorchester Elementary, right in my backyard, right around where I grew up, again, having to go through this agonizing decision to close their local community school. We should end this program. Beyond high school, our goal as a state should be debt-free education for everyone. I was able to work my way through school. After 4 years, came out with $770 in student debt. That was because we had a mentality in Wisconsin where all of us thought it was worthwhile and beneficial to make sure that every student had access to education. And now the mentality has changed where we're saying you're on your own. It's up to you and your family to do the paying. So general state support of our university system has been declining steadily. That means tuition has to rise steadily. We now have students coming out with an average of $30,000 in student debt. I ran into a young woman recently with $150,000 in student debt. That is taking Wisconsin down a very dangerous path and one that we cannot afford to travel.
An educated citizenry is the greatest asset any state can have. If we had one asset, that's what we have to have. This governor has cut $1 billion out of education, then just before election time, he puts it all back, and he had the gall, the chutzpah to say, I'm the education governor. And that would remind me of the head of North Korea saying he's a human rights advocate before he shoots 5 of his relatives. I mean, this is just not right. We can't fall for this again. There has to be full funding, number one. Number two, allusion was made to the formula, and I agree with that. The purpose of the formula is to allocate more aids to districts where people are not as wealthy as in other districts. And the property tax, there are disparities in it, it doesn't entirely work, and I think that has to be readjusted. On the voucher system, it was originally put in the early 90s to reintegrate the Milwaukee schools, as partially what it was supposed to do. And it hasn't had that effect, and it's been expanded statewide, and it simply pays tuitions for people who are already paying their own tuitions in private schools. That's got to stop. So when I get in, I would freeze it and then draw it back in a responsible fashion. I mean, there are people in some of these schools in Milwaukee. The other thing, though, that I will say is my father was on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for 34 years, and some people in this audience were his students. I think the University of Wisconsin system, Madison is one of the top 50 universities in the world. UWM is an R1 research institute, and the school that it bumped to get there was Dartmouth. UWM is a terrific university. Our whole system is terrific. And what he has done is vandalized it. He left college under humiliating circumstances, and he has a psychological need to injure accomplishment that he's incapable of. So what he did is he's cut $1 billion. No, I'm serious about this. $1 billion, gotten rid of statutory tenure, attacked the mission statement, insulted the professors. I'm proud of the University of Wisconsin. I'm a graduate of their law school, and I will put all that funding back in. I will lower tuitions, but fully fund it by more aid to that university and make it once again a premier university. And my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
I do have to mention that I'm a very proud alumni of the University of Wisconsin. I spent 10 years as a student. If there was ever a giant education lie, it goes back 30 years, which was the statement that the competition of charter and privatization and vouchers would improve the Milwaukee public school system. And as Matt just mentioned, that lie has just been topped in the last 2 weeks with Scott Walker saying that he's the education governor. Now, in the introduction I said 5 critical areas for sustainability of a family. Housing is one of them. Homeless children do not learn. And that makes a second point. And that point is that kids spend over 2/3 of their time outside of the classroom. And that time, that out-of-school time, is critical in terms of what they do during the summer, what they do in the weekends, what happens in the evenings and on their vacations. And those of you who are retired teachers, and I'm sure there's more than one or two of you here today, you know that what happens outside of the classroom has a tremendous bearing, and if we don't address those issues, we are not going to succeed in educating our kids. I said the very first time I was mayor, as I came to understand the importance of public school education, there was nothing I could do for the community that was as important to the future as what happened in our schools. And that's why we all have to be partners in the education of our kids. And one of the things that's happening, whether we're talking Milwaukee or we're talking the smaller communities in the state of Wisconsin, is this. Grandparents are not seeing their grandchildren because their children, one, can't get decent jobs, and two, they don't trust the quality of education in our state. Now, how are we going to fund it? If we have to, we're going to raise the sales tax 1/2 cent. I'd rather see it come out of a progressive income tax. But the other thing is last week's U.S. Supreme Court decision, which is going to bring hundreds of millions of dollars to the state of Wisconsin in new sales tax revenues from the internet and catalog sales. Governor Walker has already said he's going to use that to make tax cuts. You can guess who's going to get those tax cuts. That money, for starters, goes right into our public education, and yes, it is to be based on population and poverty. Thank you.
You know, our greatest commodity is our children, whether you have kids or not, because they're our future, and they're going to take care of all of us one day. And their greatest currency is their education. So this is not something that should be a Republican or a Democrat issue. We should make sure that we take care of our greatest commodity across this entire state. You know, our governor took $1.6 billion from public education by way of $800 million in tax and cuts from state aid, and by way of not letting school districts increase their levy. $1.6 billion. Now he's putting back $630 million because he's running for governor. He's calling that progress. Now he's, as was said, he is the pro-school superintendent. It's like, as a wise man once said, that's like taking a knife, sticking it 9 inches in my back, and pulling it out 4 inches. And I'm supposed to say thank you. I still have a knife in my back. You know, I actually went to the same school district as Governor Walker. We're both from Delavan-Darien School District. Me and Governor Walker went to the same high school, graduated from the same high school. He's 10 years older than I, and obviously we took some different classes. But, as Mike said, Darien Elementary School, which is in our school district, is closing down because a referendum didn't pass this past spring. Solon Springs, Wisconsin. They actually have to have a referendum not to give merit increases to teachers, not to put a new wing on the school, mind you, but just to keep the lights on, just for operational costs. So here's my plan. If you go to our website, you'll see it. We're not going to be going through referendums and actually having school districts have to have referendums just to keep the lights on. We call it reimagining schools. And we're going to pass a constitutional amendment that requires that the state pays for 2/3 of the budget of each school district. That's going to alleviate the problems and the stress that every school district has, and it's going to give them the ability to actually have adequate staffing, adequate funding, and make sure we take care of our greatest commodity, which is our children. We can do this, and education has got to be at the top of any of our lists, and I believe it is, what we've heard. But our governor right now has done a disservice to education. There's an attack on education to take $250 million from the UW system. Obviously, that's a problem. I believe that public dollars should go to public education. It's that simple. And we have to do everything in our power to make sure we take care of our kids.
I want to start in a little different way. I talked about science before. The research clearly shows that investment in early childhood education is the best investment we can make. In the state of Wisconsin, in our poorest zip code, with kids that need high quality early education, there are no high quality early childhood education programs, period. Think about that. As governor, I will make sure we are going to have a pilot in 53206, and we're going to have a high-quality early education program, and we're going to pay for it. Bottom line, those kids need it first. Second of all, I have had a plan in front of the legislature for the last 3 bienniums that's called Fair Funding for Our Future. It is something that had been implemented at that time. We'd have $1,600 per kid on average across the state of Wisconsin. And more importantly, that aid will have been distributed equitably, fairly. My theory of action has always been the kid needs an extra lift, he or she should get an extra lift, and if that extra lift costs money, so be it. That's what fair funding is all about. Have school boards across the state supporting that. I have to talk quickly about higher education. I'm on Board of Regents. It's the worst part of my job. We've gone in Walker's term from 50% state aid to the University of Wisconsin system to 15. No wonder people have lots of debt. We have to do our job there. And I know I have to talk about vouchers. I've fought against vouchers. I've kicked out 20 or 30 schools from the program for malfeasance and all sorts of bad things. I prevented schools from getting into the program. As my friend Dale Schultz said, Republican, we cannot afford 2 systems of publicly funded schools, and now we have many. We've gone from a school system that was around choice to a system that's around flat out subsidizing. We can stop that. I will freeze it, and we will stop it. Thank you.
Here's the question. After the first 4 years of your administration, what will Wisconsin look like?
A hell of a lot better. Here's the deal. My campaign is based on some really basic Wisconsin values. They're not necessarily Democratic values or Republican values. It's things that people care about. First of all, our schools. We have to make sure that we have adequate funding for our schools. We have to make sure that that funding is equitably distributed. We have to make sure that our University of Wisconsin system, 15% doesn't cut it anymore, folks. If we want to invest in the best thing for our economy and most importantly for our democracy, we have to invest in our system, our K-20 system. And I'll use this as a quick example. You see what's going wrong in higher education when Stevens Point and Superior are saying your humanities don't count. In my humble opinion as a parent and grandparent, the hell they don't count. That's what makes kids and young people better adults. The other issue that's a hugely important to me, it's a value, it's a Wisconsin value, is making sure that our natural resources are protected. We are going to be balancing the needs of the environment and young people wanting to stay in the state because of our natural resources, and also businesses. Clearly, the businesses are winning out. We will have a clean environment. We will have protections in place, especially for our water. We will also, after 4 years, we will have money, adequate money for a transportation system. I believe that's a bipartisan issue. People don't want to have second-class citizenship in the state. They want to have good infrastructure. They want to have good internet. People in Wisconsin deserve it all across the state. We will get that. That is a Republican and Democrat issue that we will succeed on. The other thing that's critical, and we've talked about it before, I believe by taking the Medicaid money and making sure that it's invested wisely in our system, we won't have the need to have the Wisconsin Dental Association put together a mission of mercy in the state of Wisconsin so that people can have their teeth extracted and make sure their teeth are clean and they're healthy. That is not the Wisconsin that we want. We, at the end of 4 years, that association will not need to do a mission of mercy for our state. The last thing I want to say, after 4 years, we will be in a position to re-elect me as governor. I am the candidate standing up in front of you who has won 3 times statewide. I'm someone that has in charge of agencies and school districts over my 40-year career. I know how to run things. I pledge to you that the people of Wisconsin will have not political hacks running their agencies that deliver services that you are needed. We need to have people in charge of those agencies that actually know what the hell they're doing. That's a pledge of mine. That you will see after 4 years also.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
These are the closing statements, by the way, in a sense, so feel free to applaud.
When we started this conversation, I said there were 5 critical areas that are essential for the sustenance of a family. Well, I kind of group functions of government into 3 areas that are relevant to this discussion. One of them has to do with how we deal with entitlements. And I think you've heard all of us as candidates talk about how we're going to make reforms, particularly in the area of health. Second area is making a community a great place. That's principally a function of local government. But there are things a state government should and can do that affect the quality of that place. We know it in terms of the environment particularly. We know it in terms of the challenges from one end of the state to the other in terms of the quality of our drinking water. We know what happens when highways are built and they destroy and disrupt neighborhoods and communities. The third area is those 5 services that I started with. What is that vision that's going to change Wisconsin? Quality child care, transportation, which includes public transportation, as well as recognizing the future of electric vehicles. And while we're talking gas taxes, we're going to have to start figuring out now how we are going to have fees on our electric bills because gasoline-powered vehicles are going to disappear. It means education. And we know that education is not just what takes place in the classroom, but how we address the needs of our kids of all ages, all races, all communities, rural and urban. It means housing. I mentioned earlier, homeless kids do not learn. People who are homeless do not have an opportunity to take full advantage of whatever is available in terms of the health system. People who are housing challenged are spending too much money, making it then unavailable to take care of clothing, in terms of transportation, and all the other necessities of life. Transportation, education, quality child care, health care, and I think we have to recognize that it's creating systems that work, that are going to have us eventually putting together neighborhoods and communities in which we close economic gaps, we close racial gaps in regards to success of education, income, unemployment, and we create a state, whether it's rural or urban, that every family, every household has an opportunity, and our children aren't fleeing with our grandchildren to Duluth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for being here. I cannot imagine a better way to spend my birthday. I might get ice cream on the way home, though. Cops. I did that last week with all my sisters. It was great. And when I am governor, we are going to be a state of opportunity and fairness again. We're going to make sure that Wisconsin is the best place to raise a family and the best place to grow a business. Because every person in the state deserves to have those same kind of opportunities that I've had. We can build this together. This is not about me or about who the governor is. It's about the movement that we can build to change the direction of this state. Elections are about the future, and so much hangs in the balance. One of us is going to be on the stage with Scott Walker, but all of us have to work together if we want to build this Wisconsin and have strong families and strong communities. It's up to all of us together, and we're going to do that the same way that we're going to win this election. We're going to have great public schools. We're going to have healthcare for all. We're going to have a vibrant democracy where everyone can participate. We're going to end mass incarceration, make our budget responsible again, have clean air and clean water. There is so much that we can do together. But first, we got to win this election. And when I thought about getting into this race, I said, I want 3 things. I want somebody who's progressive and shares my Wisconsin values. I want somebody who can win and who's running a strong, smart campaign and raising the resources necessary and media savvy, someone who can go toe-to-toe and beat Scott Walker. And I want somebody who's ready to govern. Somebody who's done it and knows how to extend a hand across the aisle and pass something, as I did when I helped pass the first pro-choice law in 30 years in this state through an anti-choice assembly. Now, we have great candidates on this stage, and we have great candidates who left the race. But I am the candidate that has all those three things. I am proud of my progressive values, and I'm proud of using those values to actually get results, to turn these big ideas, this grand vision, into real state policy results, because we need somebody ready to be governor on day one. And we need somebody who can run a strong and winning campaign. And I'm doing that. We have unprecedented momentum on this campaign. We've won 6 consecutive straw polls, including by a 2-to-1 margin over the rest of the field at the statewide Democratic Party convention. We're winning in Waukesha and in southwestern Wisconsin. We're winning with educators, and we're winning with people of all different persuasions, people who care about mass incarceration. We've got the backing of Emily's List, which is a huge organization that's dedicated to electing Democratic women who are pro-choice. And I'm very proud that I've received the endorsement of Andy Gronick, who sat on the stage with us for many, many months. I would love to earn your support in this race so that we can build the Wisconsin that we know is possible together. I'm asking for your vote on August 14th and again on November 6th, and I'll ask for your vote again 4 years from now. But for now, I want you to get engaged. It is time to get off the fence. It is time to get excited and elect a new governor in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilda.
4 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to say, oh my gosh, finally, state government is putting people first. That's a very different vision than what we have with the folks in charge right now. So what does putting people first means? It means freedom to learn so that everybody has access to two-year UW campus and tech college, and never is money a barrier for getting into higher education. It means broadband across the state, which is, I have internet by Pony Express, so I have to admit, it's an important priority. It means mass transit, so that there are not bus routes that are being shut down because the state hasn't funded transit in a way that keeps up with inflation. It means making progress on the achievement gap so that minority children have the resources that they need to thrive. It means making sure that our water and our air are clean and that the polluters are held responsible and they are taken to court and that the laws are enforced. It means making sure that all of state government works on dealing with both the effects of climate change and preventing future climate change, which means putting back the Office of Energy Independence and finding alternatives and supporting those alternatives to fossil fuels. It means making sure that local government has the resources that they need. Funding shared revenue, that's the money that local folks get, which has been flat funded for a very, very long time, which is why our local communities are having such a problem with, for example, fixing the roads and helping with keeping our community safe and putting the infrastructure in place. But people first is more than just a slogan for me. It is the work that I have done in the last 12 years in the Senate. All of these priorities that I've mentioned are part of and the other priorities that I've mentioned today are part of alternatives that I've written to the governor's budget, using the same amount of dollars and rearranging the priorities. So, for example, I've looked at what do I not fund? What do I take money away from? Well, I don't think that folks that send their kids to private schools that are wealthy should get a tax break. I took that money. I think that corporations, especially manufacturing corporations, some of whom are not paying anything in taxes, ought to pay their fair share in taxes. I've taken that money, just a part of that money, to fully fund my free tuition plan. I've showed how to spend these priorities and put people first with the same amount of dollars. I've made the hard choices. I've showed where the money has come from, and I'm prepared. And I live in a part of the state that Democrats have to win if we're going to win. I won in a district that Scott Walker won 3 times. I won 3 times, and Trump won 3 times. Thank you, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. After 4 years of Matt Flynn as governor, above all, you're going to see the restoration of unnegotiable integrity to the government of this state. Without integrity, we have nothing. And that means a government accountability board that's fair. It means the end of gerrymandering and an Iowa commission to come in on an equal basis. It means an objective civil service restored once again that took us decades to put into effect unnegotiable integrity. And the second thing I'm going to mention at the top, because it will fuel a lot of what I'm about to say, you will see no Foxconn. I am the only person, I think, in this field, and certainly the only person with a degree of knowledge of this kind of litigation that says there will be no Foxconn. They will not pollute Lake Michigan. They will not fill in wetlands. They will not have the eminent domain power to throw people out of work. There will be no corporation that's exempt from our Court of Appeals jurisdiction. And there's no $4.5 billion going to one business near the Illinois border, all our eggs in one basket, in a robot industry. That will not happen. Now, with that money, we are going to refund the University of Wisconsin system to make it, again, one of the greatest universities in the world, Madison, R1 Research Institute, UWM. And I have my proposal is pre-K 14, not K-12. More money for pre-K education. The first 2 years of education at the in-state technical college universities, free tuition. It can be done. We're going to eliminate the manufacturer's exemption. We're going to eliminate those tax breaks. We're going to eliminate Foxconn. I'm going to get the $1 billion back from Medicaid and the $800 million for trains. You will see the environmental laws once again enforced. You're going to see CAFOs eliminated if any county doesn't want it, local control. And you will also see prove it first back for mining. They're going to have to find a mine somewhere that it worked for 10 years. And you're going to find us involved in litigation with Illinois, on the side of Illinois, and also with the Menominee Indians. And I'm going to say this. When I served in the Navy, I defended my country. When I served as a lawyer, I defended my clients. And when I serve as governor of this state, I will defend you. And finally this. The ship I was stationed on had sailors from Mississippi and New York, from Alabama, California, Wisconsin, and Arkansas. There was no north-south divide. There was no urban-rural divide. We were shipmates. Everybody in this room is my shipmate. Everybody in this state is my shipmate. And if you put this Navy vet in the governor's chair, I will turn the ship around. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
You know, one of the policies that actually shapes our plan, or actually kind of guides the course for our campaign, is the pay it forward policy. And real quickly, my son wants, so they play video games now, and they can actually play interactive video games where he can sit at our house, and he can play with Tommy, who's at his house, and Jonah, who's at his house. And they're talking to each other, and they're playing the same video game, even though they're not in the same room. Now, we couldn't do that when I was young. So I wanted to see one day, like, how long would my son play video games without me telling him he has to cut it off? So it was one Sunday, and I would go by his room. I say, hey, you want to go to brunch? No. I say, hey, you want to go shoot baskets? No, I had practice yesterday. So you know that little nuthead played video games for 12 hours straight. He came out of his room only to use the bathroom and actually to get something to drink and something to eat. So I said, now you're telling me now we're going to let him go 4 years in high school. He's going to be a freshman next year, and we're going to pay for his college. I said, no, he should have to earn it. I was a Bernie Sanders delegate in 2016. He talked about free college. That's all great. But as my dad said, someone has to pay for it, man. There are no free lunches. So what we came up with was a plan that from 5th grade to 12th grade, you're going to actually volunteer. You have to put your phone down, put the video games down. You have to do community service. And you're going to have to actually go volunteer at your local vet home and help those who have served our country. You're going to actually volunteer at the homeless shelter. You gotta go work at the Boys and Girls Club and help out. You gotta shovel snow and rake leaves for the senior who can't afford it and can't do it. So you're gonna actually help out people. And then you're gonna get 2 years of free college, and the last 4 years you'll have a loan forgiveness program that will pay for the last 4 years when you stay in our state 5 to 6 years. That's what we need to do to bring the state back together, a sense of service. I've been a firefighter for 21 plus years. As firefighters, we respond to people in the worst days of their lives. And when people are at their worst, we have to be at our best. So we need an economy that thrives for everybody. We need schools that take care of our greatest commodity. We need health care for everybody. We need infrastructure and roads that actually work and actually get people to work safely. We need to tackle the mass incarceration program we have here in our state. We need to give back local control because people can't pay for essential services. We need to raise wages. The state of Wisconsin needs a raise. But we can't do any of this stuff we're talking about here unless we actually win. Now, Mayor Salgan actually hammered me for having the endorsement of the operating engineers. Well, you know what we need to do to win? We have to not only be in places like this where people all think like us and we all sit here and shake our heads and agree to the same things. We have to actually get people out there in the state of Wisconsin that don't normally vote for Democrats to come back to our side. So I will take the endorsement of operating engineers. I will take the endorsement because I represent a contingent around the state that voted for Barack Obama and then 4 years later voted for Donald Trump. Those are my members, firefighters across our state. So we can bat an eye and say, well, we don't want them. No, we want them. Because in order to beat Scott Walker, it's going to require all hands working. And we have to bring our state back together, not the divisiveness of politics, of resentment and politics of division. We have to bring back people back together. We can't just go around talking about what's wrong with Walker. We have to talk about what's right with us. I have a plan to do that. We built the infrastructure to do that. Check us out on MalinMitchell.com. My time is up. I'll keep going, but check us out. We have to win this thing.
Thank you, Malin.
When people power overcomes money power, and we get a very different kind of leadership and a new politics in our state, then in 4 years, Wisconsin can be well on its way to erasing the phrase working poor from our vocabulary. We can be well on our way to being a place where if you work, you're in the middle class. We can be well on our way to having a living wage for every worker, and health care for all, and debt-free education and job training for everyone, and high-speed internet everywhere. And we can be well on our way because we will have established a goal of how we get to the point of being 100% powered by renewable energy. And we will be well on our way to having our government on the side of incentivizing the development of that clean energy economy. We will be well on our way to reaching the Midwest average in producing clean energy jobs. And if we could just get to the average, that'd be 30,000 more people employed in the clean energy sector. And we can get there. And in 4 years, we can be well on our way to being a state where nobody turns on a water faucet and is afraid to drink what comes out. We can be a state that is well on its way to restoring justice in our tax system. Right now, if you total up all the state and local taxes we pay, all of them, the wealthiest 1% pays the lowest overall tax rate. We don't need any new taxes, but we got to make darn sure everybody pays the ones we've already got. And we can be that state, and in 4 years, we'll be well on our way. But I'll tell you, we don't get any of these things unless we also dedicate ourselves to being a state that is well on its way to restoring the reputation that we had for generations as a beacon of clean and open and honest government. That was Wisconsin's heritage. That's what Wisconsin was known for. And we can't lay claim to that reputation today because we have allowed cronyism and corruption and legal bribery to take root in our state, and it has to be uprooted. It's been my life's work to expose and aim to reverse those poisons in our political process. And so I'll just end with this. Our state is in a position right now where we're leading the nation in shrinkage of the middle class so far in the 21st century. And we've got levels of economic inequality not seen in Wisconsin since the Great Depression. But you think back to when the country plunged into that Great Depression. The greatest president the Democratic Party ever produced shined a light on how our country could get out of that trauma. And one of the things he said to the American people at that time was the forces of organized money are unanimous in their hatred for me. And then he told his fellow Americans, I welcome their hatred. I'm running for governor to do everything in my power to bring that spirit back in our time. We need to renew that spirit in our day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Panel, one thing I gotta say is based on what we saw today, that whoever wins in August, I think we can get behind whoever wins in August.